Welcome back, my dears, to yet another season recap of the Magnus Archives, where I basically become the archivist, taking in all of the horrors of the world over and over again for some ungodly reason. My name is Jules, and I have a Magnus Archives addiction. We're on season 5 now, so this is your one and only warning to get out of here if you haven't finished the podcast. I've got recaps on all of the other seasons if you haven't caught up and you need a refresher. But if you haven't finished the show, I need you to get out of here now. As always, I'm going to start with the Wiki recap for Season 5. A new world dawns and the Archivist has changed. Martin is still by his side, but can anything be done to return the world to its former state? So that's all I give you for the Season 5 recap. So I'm gonna go further than that. So John starts this season a post-apocalyptic world of fear. Last season ended with Peter trying to subject Martin to the Panopticon and Elias being Jonah Magnus. Jonah Magnus was the guy who started the Institute. John and Peter kind of duke it out in the lonely, and then Peter dies. So now John and Martin are hiding away in one of Daisy's old safe houses in Scotland, with Basira sending John some statements in order to keep himself, fed. John begins to read a statement and is tricked into doing the ritual for the eye, bringing forth the 14 dread powers. So John, reasonably kind of feels not great about all of this, and it's him and Martin against the world. They have a huge journey ahead of them, and they need to reach the Panopticon in Jonah, but at least it's interesting. So as a quick reminder, here are some important characters this season that are important to the storyline. So we have John, aka the Archivist, accidentally started the apocalypse and basically became a god. Martin, the Archivist's +1. Martin, also, it's important to note, is marked by the lonely and the eye. Melanie, at the end of last season, severed her connection with the eye, blinding herself to leave the Institute. Georgie is currently taking care of Melanie, and as a reminder, she cannot feel fear. Daisy, at the end of last season, was taken over by the Hunt and turned into a monster when Juliet, Trevor, and not Sasha attacked. Balsira's position at the end of season 3, beginning of season 4, is kind of unknown. I don't know, maybe I missed it and just didn't pay enough attention when I was writing this. So there's Elias/Jonah Magnus. Jonah has been body hopping from person to person, being the head of the Institute, leaving his actual body in the viewing room of the Panopticon in order to have the power of seeing everything. As we get into discussing this season, I am going to break down each 10 episodes into chapters on this video so you can kind of jump around. There's a lot more to talk about this season, and I want to make sure you guys can go back to certain parts for when you were confused. This one has just a lot going on. So we're going to start with episodes 161 to episode 170. We open this season with a somber, depressed archivist sitting in the safe house with Martin listening to old tapes. I kid you not, he spends 2 episodes moping about the past. As much as this tape is adorable for what it is, this scenario that's being listened to is just heartbreaking. John's super depressed. He did kind of end the world after all. Martin gives us some context, and apparently he's just been re-listening to these old tapes a lot. This first episode really introduces us to what John's perception of this new world is and how it differs from others' experiences. He's the archivist, and he can feel and see everyone's suffering here. Martin asks John if he thinks they can change the world back to the way it was. John plays a tape of Gertrude, who says she didn't think that the world could go back after it changed, meaning that he kind of believes her. The cabin that John and Martin have been in is revealed to be an entity of a fear itself, keeping them inside, alone, and separated from the real world. It doesn't want them to leave, and for that, they have to. Martin seems pretty understanding of the state that John is in and is ready to support him with whatever he may need, already preparing bags to leave. Before I really get deeper into this season breakdown, I feel like it's important to point out how different season 5 is from the rest of the series. I see a lot of mixed feelings about it online and how some people have a hard time liking this last season because of it. I happen to actually really like season 5. It is very different, but it's still relatable. Upon my most recent re-listen to the last season, I realized that many of the statements and fears given have a lot of subtext relating to the lives of the people before the change and how they ended up where they did. It's really easy to just focus on the scary story being told and you miss the little details. I know I did on my first couple listens. I mean, you can find examples of this happening just in the first 2 episodes. John feels alienated and depressed, so he's in a dreary cabin that's dark, dusty, and damp. This place takes care of him in the same way that when you're depressed, lying in a dark room in bed feels like it's taking care of yourself. I have another video that goes into the more philosophical discussion on fear and how it presents in the Magnus archives, so I'm not gonna super run through all of that right now, but if you're interested in a more in-depth conversation on fear, I think you should check that out. I will link that in the description and at the end of this video. So after they leave the cabin, the first statement we get is in the trenches. At this point, it's pretty easy, if not literally told to you, what entity is being discussed in each episode. This one is about the slaughter. The people of this domain seem to be subjected to endless war, killing, loss, and shell shock. It's about how senseless and overwhelming war is and how it can break you down. We hear this soldier tormented over and over, forced to fight and keep fighting, praying for death to release them from the agony and fighting. How death is the only escape, as deserting or fleeing just means dying a coward. The slaughter can be interpreted as an unwavering pressure to keep going out of fear of being seen as lesser in the situation. A feeling that drags you and pulls you along, forcing you to harbor all of your other feelings for a senseless anger. This is just the first of many statements that explores these fears deeper. While John is recording this statement, Martin hears a payphone ringing. He assumes it's for him and calls out to the phone, saying that it seems like a bad idea for him to pick up. It probably is. The Sick Village is one of my favorite episodes from this season. I feel like on the surface, the corruption is just about bugs, rot, and sickness, but it's not. The corruption is about one's unwavering need for love and how insecurity can lead to you breaking down into a shell of your former self. The corruption can be what lies beneath the persona you put on daily life, and how that lie can break you down and destroy you. This is pretty apparent in the episode, with the village people hiding their skin, hiding the rot, and pretending to be perfect. This rot, this facade, eventually destroys you, causing your entire persona to collapse, as seen when the head of the village, the one who's supposed to be the most pure, explodes after condemning one of her neighbors to death out of jealousy. We also learned that Martin and John can't really be affected by these domains. They pass through them unharmed, but the position that John holds keeps him safe. With these powers comes a lot of knowledge, and John can sorta know about anything he tries to. We hear that Daisy is passing through the domains hunting, and Balsier is tracking her down with the thought that she will kill her, like she requested. John can't see Melanie or Georgie, but doesn't think that they're dead. He thinks that he would know if they were dead, he just can't see them. Martin asks who was calling him on the phone. John says it was Annabelle Kane, but he doesn't know where she was calling from. Helen shows up at the end of this episode. Through her, we learn that yes, Martin and John are in fact dating. There was a lot of context clues before this, but you know, I don't know. I didn't catch it until she literally said it, I'm not gonna lie. John doesn't trust her, and Martin doesn't fully trust her, but Martin points out, who else is there right now? The next episode covers the stranger as our duo approaches a large carousel. John and Martin need to travel through each of the domains in order to reach the Panopticon, but they're trying to avoid traveling through this one, as an old friend is there. The statement's pretty poetic in nature, being a bit hard to understand and grasp, but that's the stranger, I guess. The stranger is very much linked to one's own personal identity as well as the sense of knowing others. This statement really covers that loss of personal identity and how isolating and scary that can be, with each victim never knowing if their name or face is truly their own. The pair run into Not Sasha post-statement, an avatar of this domain. Not Sasha tries to intimidate our duo, but John's not really fazed. He knows he has more power than her in this world and she can't hurt them. They go to leave, but Not Sasha brings up how she killed Sasha, sparking something in John. John forces the eye to look at the creature and smites it. I love this line, and it's something I quote a lot. Why? Because I have a little cat who can be evil, so I'll pick her up and look her in the eyes and quote, "Ceaseless watcher, turn your gaze upon this wretched thing," when she's being unreasonably evil. I think it's funny. Had to share. Our duo marches on and enters the domain of the buried. While the buried can be interpreted as claustrophobia, it's also the feeling of being under intense pressure, like you're trapped. This statement is about both. Our victim, Sam, has always felt trapped in his day-to-day life and that there was no hope on the horizon, that everything was for nothing. This translated into a literal sense of being buried and crushed by the earth itself. Our victim, Sam, is forced to live life as a worm, trying to tunnel back to the surface, to the light. A light that no longer exists. He eventually crosses paths with another worm and has no choice but to fight with it, battling to the death slowly in the dark. I feel like this can be interpreted as the competition we place between ourselves and the people that surround us, always striving to be better and do better so that we can succeed and prevail no matter what happens to the other. The pressure to be the best. Martin gets another phone call while waiting for John, and he picks it up this time. It is Annabelle Kane. She seems to be toying with him somehow, but the spider works in mysterious ways, so we don't really know what she's up to. Neither does Martin. John looks into Martin's thoughts and sees that Annabelle called. Martin does not appreciate that and sets some boundaries. No peeking unless Martin is in for real, actual danger. Martin states that he bets Gertrude would have done well here and she would have figured it out and everything would be fine. But John isn't so sure. We get a little statement about the woman and her time at the Institute, her assistance, and how it hurt her. She was lonely. She made so many sacrifices for the greater good, but had no one to help her through it all. She kept people at a distance and lost many of the people she did care for. Gertrude needed a purpose to do what she did, and in the apocalypse, she wouldn't really have that. She would most likely just resort back to her domain and rule over it. Martin asks about the domains, and John replies that the two of them also have one. It's what feeds them. In this world, you don't need to eat or sleep or drink, you just need to feed off of the fear of others. And so that's how they survive. They feed off of the fear of the people in their domains. Martin asks about his, but quickly takes it back. He doesn't want to know. Next up, death! Yay! This is my favorite one. Our duo must face the corpse roots and Oliver Banks this time around. Martin's feeling a little jealous of Oliver because he's the one that woke John up from his coma, and Martin basically asks John to kill Oliver because he's jealous. It's cute and funny. Death is an interesting fear to me. I really like philosophy, and the philosophical idea of death is something very entertaining. So it's less of something that scares me and more of something that motivates me. Yeah. Call me an avatar of death. I know. This statement's victim is a woman who is in almost constant fear that she will die at any given moment from a serious illness. This fear overtakes her and controls her daily life, leaving her in an almost constant state of anxiety. She does inevitably die of a heart attack, one that she suspected and knew was coming, but that she could do nothing about. We learn from the statement that when a victim reaches the end of the corpse roots, they do in fact die. In other domains, you may experience pain or feel like you've died, but you don't die. You're just put into another horrible nightmare. Here, in the arms of death, you do die. The entity of the end knows this, and as the victims of the end die, they'll be replenished by the victims of other domains. Because no new humans are being born or created. Due to this fact, eventually, the end will take everyone and the powers will have no one to be feared by anymore, although it may take thousands of years. Oliver Banks does not know how to feel about this. John decides to not kill Oliver. The next domain that we travel to is the Desolation, also known as the Lightless Flame. Jude Perry and Arthur Nolan are avatars here, but John is here for Jude. Martin reasonably doesn't want to go into the burning building to kill a woman, and John recognizes that his love for Martin is more important than his want for revenge, so he asks Martin again what he wants to do. Martin thinks this is unfair and he doesn't want to be John's dilemma answering machine. So then John decides that they're going in. While in the burning building, John performs another statement of a victim trapped here. Martin pulls him out of it as Jude Perry approaches. John asks her if she knew this would happen when she marked him. She says no. John and Jude talk for a minute, and then John, in fact, decides to smite her. While Jude is being smited, she admits that if she had known what marking him would have done, she still would have done it. Then she explodes. Our next domain is the Lonely. John and Martin have become separated, and as the tape clicks on, we hear Martin narrating to it about his experiences. He seems disjointed, lost, confused, and his memory is foggy. This episode to me really feels like what it's like to be depressed, and honestly, I don't want to dive in and break that down. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't particularly like thinking about depression that hard since I'm doing really well right now. Sorry. Anyways, Martin like half snaps out of it enough to let John find him, and John offers Martin the option to stay here, away from all the outside pain, to forget it all. Martin doesn't want to do that. He wants to go with John, so they push on. That's our first 10 episodes, and now we're on to episode 171 to 180. So this one's interesting. Our duo enters a garden, one of disfigured and modified humans. Our gardener? Jared Hopworth, Avatar of the Flesh. Jared knows that John is there to destroy him, but he requests to hear what the Eye has to say about his domain before he does. The domain of the flesh can be a pretty triggering topic, so I'm just prefacing we're going to be talking about that real quick. A lot of the fear in this episode is based around self-image. Each of the plants talked about describes an individual's relationship with their own body and disoriented thoughts, feelings, and actions associated with them. The Gristlebloom orchid seems to be based on bodybuilding and a fear of being seen as lesser or not strong enough. The bone rose is based around eating disorders and a compulsion to stay thin. The cutaway tulip is based on body alterations through plastic surgery and the fear of deteriorating with age, and the lily of the damned is based on a fear that the body is failing and is irreplaceable. At the end of this episode, Jared Hopworth does get smited by John, and he dies for good. The next domain we enter is a web domain. The web is tricky and hard to explain properly because my thoughts always end up getting all twisted up. I suppose that's the point, though. This domain depicts addiction in the act of a play, forcing the main character to be pulled through the motions of addiction even if they no longer want to do this anymore. There's a lot that could be said about this episode and about the spider, but I'm gonna save my analysis of it for a later video. John almost gets strung along this addictive, repetitive action, though. After narrating out the statement, he begins another act of the play, and Martin has to pull him out of it. The spider is addictive. After leaving the web's domain, John seems to be in a hurry to get past the next one. Why? This next domain is a place for young children to grow and mature so that their fears grow and mature too. So this is a place full of scared children. The avatar of this domain is Callum Brody. He was the child kidnapped by Maxwell Rayner in the failed attempt for him to body hop. Although it seems that Callum was marked in the process anyway. Callum now is an avatar of the dark and lives in this domain in the apocalypse, tormenting children with what lives in the dark. Martin is really upset by this place, and it drives him to want to get to the tower even more. Episode 174 is a vast episode. This statement follows a mother who is trying to escape from a giant monster, one that she can't comprehend the size of. Her mind goes back and forth as to whether it would be better for the monster to be so far away and that big that she can't comprehend it, or the monster to be close and be that big that she can't comprehend it. She tries to escape it with her family, but comes to the realization that no matter how far she gets, she can't escape. The monologue eventually reveals that the monster is made up of millions of still living people who have no choice but to move forward. Martin questions how long it will take to get through this domain, since, well, it's vast. It could go on forever. Simon Fairchild shows up for a minute, and Martin wants to kill him, but John hesitates, misses his opportunity, and Simon leaves. John and Martin stop to take a break, and this episode is about the extinction. I'm really torn on whether or not this power actually emerged. In this episode, we hear John refer to Peter Lucas as a victim of the power, the fear that all you love will come to an end. It could still be an offshoot of the end, or a full power. I don't know. Our duo continues on, entering the domain of the hunt. That's where Balsier and Daisy are. This particular domain of the hunt isn't about the chase. It's about being part of a pack and then having that pack turn on you. After a brief statement from John, we find out that they're being followed by Trevor. We also find out that Daisy killed Julia, leaving Trevor alone to run from Daisy. He is no longer a hunter. He's just prey. Trevor is holding Martin as hostage as he can when he is taken out by Balsira. She doesn't trust that John and Martin are real, trying to make them prove their identities to her, but she's been alone this whole time hunting down Daisy, so this is pretty reasonable. John, mostly convinces her that they're safe in the smuggest way possible. This episode concludes Act 1, and at this point the season went on a bit of a hiatus. Not that that is going to stop my breakdown, but I did want to mention it. I feel so bad for the people that had to wait for the next episode to come out, because this one's a real cliffhanger. So Basira joins the party as they journey to the Panopticon. Our next stop? Wonderland House. This place is terrifying to me. Wonderland House is a psychiatric facility, It takes its victims with real problems and gaslights them into thinking that there is in fact nothing wrong. All of their problems aren't real and all their suffering is completely their own fault. If mental health isn't something you struggle with, this may be a harder concept to understand. I don't want to go too into this here because this episode hits a little close to home for me, but basically this is a spiral domain. As our gang explores the facility, they come across one of Daisy's victims. Basira knows who he is. Basira does not want to accept that Daisy is a full-blown monster and is chasing people that don't necessarily deserve to be killed. John warns Basira that you can't hunt a monster that you refuse to see. Helen then arrives to offer Basira a way to Daisy through her corridors. But she would have to go alone since John can't go through them, and him and Martin are basically a package deal at this point. Basira refuses her offer. The trio marches on, coming to a processing plant of the flesh. We find out that the power can create people if need be in order to heighten the fear of this place. The people in this place were only created to kind of make the lines longer, so it's you feel that waiting time, that pressure more. The factory of the flesh is a meat farm, walking a human through the process of what an animal goes through in a plant like this, but with the added mental strain of being alive and conscious. This one is gross and makes me feel icky. I have a hard time talking about this one. Our three musketeers come across another one of Daisy's kills here. A woman Daisy was sure was a drug dealer. Daisy's actions actually stopped the woman from getting clean from her addiction. Basira recounts on how she joined the police force to do good in the world, but that her ideals were skewed after joining the force and getting sectioned. She says that Daisy was trying to get better too. John says at this point there's no way to save Daisy. She's too far gone to the hunt, and Basira will have to kill her. Our next stop is another desolation domain. You see, there isn't just one way to be afraid of each power. This place forces you to burn everything that you love, and our victim here fears each time a new load of items comes through, he may have to incinerate someone he loves. This man is also being hunted by Daisy, who now shows up to kill him. Daisy hears our trio and begins to maul John. Basira steps in and Daisy recognizes her, asking her to join her on her hunt. Basira can't do it, shooting and killing Daisy. This kind of messes her up, and she decides she needs some time alone to process it all and dispose of Daisy's body. She says that they will meet up again in London. With that, we leave Basira, and John and Martin head off again. John and Martin walk through a necropolis, and John seems excited. Martin asks where they're going, and John says he doesn't know. They approach a manor house, and John realizes that he can't see in it or use his powers. They climb up the front steps, and the front door opens, revealing Annabelle Kane? The two enter the house where Mikhail Salesa is just chilling. They get 2 seconds to register this before they both collapse from exhaustion. We're on our next 10 episodes. We're on 181 to 190. So time and space doesn't work properly in the apocalypse. They've just been going and going. No need for sleep or eating because the powers changed the way the world works. When they get to a place that's kind of outside the apocalypse, all the exhaustion just kind of hits at once. They're sleepy guys. After the two of them get some much-needed rest, they talk with Salesa. They ask why he's with Annabelle, and he's like, I don't know, she's kind of showed up, but she's not hurting me, and one time she killed a corruption monster that snuck in, so I don't really care. He is supportive of their goal to take down Jonah and get to the Panopticon, but he says he can't offer much help. As they press him for more info, we get a statement from Mikhail about how he ended up in this paranormal mess. Mikhail was one of Jürgen Leitner's assistants in his library, but after realizing that the powers couldn't be controlled, imprisoned, or contained, he left. He began smuggling art and then soon cursed objects, being careful not to use any of the objects and never serving a power. Over time, he learned of the rituals, and thinking that eventually one would succeed, he made plans to keep himself safe in the apocalypse. He found that artifact that would keep him hidden, a camera with a broken lens, and stole it and then faked his own death. It paid off, I guess, because Homeboy's not being tormented by the powers. Due to the lack of contact with the eye, he can't keep himself locked in. He needs that connection now. John and Martin prepare to leave, and once they do, John can't seem to remember anything from this day and asks Martin to recap him. Our next stop is another hospital, but this one's about physical ailments rather than mental. This is another one that hits harder to home if it's something you struggle with in your own life. The doctors here are contradictory, and it seems like there's never a right answer on what needs to be done, leaving the patients worse off than when they started. John and Martin run into Breakin here, the remaining half of the creature calling itself Breakin and Hope, the delivery guys. Breakin is lost without hope still, and the apocalypse is hell for him when he's alone. He asks John to put him out of his misery. John sees no reason not to, so he puts him down. John and Martin approach the next domain. Helen reappears. She says she wants to see what path they will choose, as there's a crossroads ahead, and one path leads through Martin's domain, a swirling mix of the Eye and Lonely. Martin wonders how he can have a domain if he's not an avatar. John explains that the term avatar is just that, a term. In this world, there are two types of people, the Watchers and the Watched, and he's technically a Watcher, feeding off of the fear from his domain. Martin chooses the shorter path, which is a walk through his domain. But we're not there yet. The next episode has John and Martin in a domain full of ants, most likely a domain of the corruption. One victim, disgusted by the ants, trying to kill them all and stop them from crawling all over him, while the other cannot bear to kill the ants as he deems them his friends and living beings. Martin tells John that one of the victims is nearby, a man that had given a statement, Jordan Kennedy. Jordan was the exterminator that incinerated Prentice's body, I think. He was involved in the Prentice case somehow. John gives Jordan the power to be an avatar and grants him protection. This is cool and all, but Jordan did not ask to be an avatar and now must suffer knowing that he is feeding off of the fear of others. Our boys continue their journey, coming to a prison where we get a look into the justice system and the mistreatment of prisoners. This episode's a bit touchy, and breaking it down here is a can of worms that I'm not ready for yet. The two run into a prisoner here who was once an officer. He was part of the team that arrested Elias. Martin considers making him an avatar, but asks John, who says he would enjoy it. Martin decides against making him an avatar, and they leave. Upon leaving, Martin finds himself alone in his own domain. So Martin and John are separated, but Martin runs into himself? But a much more blunt version. Martin talks to himself about the guilt he feels feeding off of the people here, but that he is in fact prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice if he needs to for the greater good. He knows he can't make things better for people trapped in his domain, but he won't make things worse either. While Martin is in his domain, John enters Helen's domain, a never-ending hotel filled with doors and corridors. John speaks with Helen and gets her to admit that she is in fact trying to kill him. She likes the way the world is now and does not want him to turn it back. As they travel through the building, John tells Helen that he has already made up his mind to kill her. Helen is more powerful here than ever though, and manages to evade John turning the eye to her. She claims that she isn't scared. A lie. John focuses in on this lie, using that point of weakness to smite her, ending Helen. This destroys the domain, and John leaves meeting up with Martin. John fills Martin in on what happened to Helen, explaining that yes, she did want to be their friend, just not a good friend. The spiral isn't about telling you all lies, it's just about not telling you the truth. And they move on. The two are now just outside of London. The two enter London proper, being watched at all angles by the cameras and shapes from the windows. This is the domain of the eye. We get a couple of eye statements here before they go into the Panopticon itself. A giant tower looming over the world. The tower where Jonah is. Martin had left for a minute to try to find a way in, and when he comes back, he seems like he's hiding something. He drags John into a hatch where they enter the tunnels. The same ones that were below the Institute. Here, they meet up with Melanie and Georgie, who are both seemingly unaffected by the change. Melanie had severed her connection with the eye by blinding herself, and Georgie has no fear and therefore isn't affected. Melanie and Georgie fled to the tunnels after the change, and now rescue people from the surface to shield them from the torment. This is the end of Act 2, and we have 10 more episodes left. So this is going to be episode 191 to 199, and then 200 gets its own special section. I'm going to be referring to the people that Georgie and Melanie rescued as the survivors. Most of them are given names, but I'm not going to go into much detail here, so for now they're just the survivors. Two of the survivors find a tape recorder in the tunnels shortly before Georgie and Melanie return with John and Martin. The survivors ask where John and Martin were rescued from, and John explains that they were not rescued, rather they travel through the world like Georgie and Melanie do. He explains that they're old friends of Georgie and Melanie. Tape recorders continue to appear, despite Georgie's attempts to turn them off and destroy them, leading to a bit, okay, more than a bit, of frustration on her part. She's nervous that having John and Martin there is putting the safety of the survivors at risk. Melanie explains to Martin that some of the survivors took the saving in a bit more of a religious direction and deemed Georgie and Melanie prophets. Although this is partly Melanie's fault, to try to give hope to the survivors, she lied and told them that she dreamed that the world would be okay. So she kind of gave herself that, blind prophet thing. Yeah, I don't know. It's whatever. John and Martin wait for Melanie and Georgie to return and talk about what they're going to do. John explains that there are old archivists guarding the Panopticon and that they're going to need to find a way in. He also explains the banishing of the eye will not end well for him as he relies on the connection for his own well-being. John and Martin, guided by Melanie, go to the entrance of the Panopticon. John commands the archivists to let him through. The two climb the staircase and enter the Panopticon to find Rosie. Rosie was the assistant to Elias at the Institute, having retained her position in the apocalypse, I guess. We get a little statement about her life and how she's always been curious and had a thirst for knowledge. She eventually lets John and Martin go see Jonah. The pair enter the room to find Jonah floating in the center of their room, speaking a never-ending statement of all that he can see. Martin asks if the real Elias is somewhere within Jonah, launching John into another statement. This one's about Elias, the original Elias. We learn that Elias doesn't know how he heard about the job, nor does he remember applying, but took the position of the Institute. John confirms that Elias is just a shadow of who he was before, and he is beyond saving. John says that he could destroy Jonah by killing Elias's body, but that the eye would take him as a replacement, and he would become the pupil. John and Martin argue over what to do. Martin doesn't think it's worth killing Jonah just to replace him, and John thinks that maybe it is. John storms off, but when he returns, he learns that Martin has left with Annabelle Kane. John realizes the two must be going to Hilltop Road. John leaves the tunnels and he's alone on a boat? While rowing, he gives monologues about a victim within the water, one who feels like they can never come up for air. A bit later, John picks up Balsira and quickly fills her in on the situation, telling her they need to go save Martin. Eventually, they reach the shore and find themselves back in the little bubble of no apocalypse, finding a tape recorder and a web. Martin and Annabelle are together, and we learn that Martin went willingly with her to hear her out. They enter Hilltop Road, and Martin reads a statement about the house, how it's a crack in reality, letting all the fears seep in through it. The web recognizes this, and Annabelle was going to use Martin to make the final push and cast the powers into many dimensions, but realized that's no longer possible. Annabelle detects John and suspends Martin over the rift, bound in web, in order to get John in the state of mind she wants him to be in. Annabelle explains what the rift is and explains that she needed him to feel the place in order to understand properly. They discuss how the powers don't really think, and aside from the web in the end, they don't understand that achieving the ultimate desire and manifesting in the world will ultimately destroy them. Annabelle explains that the powers don't exist in every reality, but with John's help, they could escape into another reality, allowing them to continue living on. If they did this, the powers would exist as they did before the change, but there's still the possibility for them to become what they are now. Basira asks what would happen to the avatars if they did this. Annabelle doesn't have a straight answer to this. Throughout the series, we've learned that no power can see into the future. They can make assumptions about it, though. Annabelle assumes that they would either die or be dragged through the rift with the powers. Balsira asks how it could be done, wanting to know all the options the team has available to them. Annabelle says that they would have to destroy both the archives and the pupil simultaneously. Annabelle reveals the gas main below the Institute and says that they have everything they need to blow it up, alluding to the spiderweb lighter that John has had. Annabelle hands Martin back over to John as she has nothing left to explain. John does not kill Annabelle. Martin, John, and Balsira head back to London proper to meet up with Georgie and Melanie in the tunnels. They need to discuss their options. When they arrive back, they learn that the old archivists took the survivors back to the surface. John, Martin, Balsira, Georgie, and Melanie discuss their options. They've got 3 choices. 1. Carry out Annabelle's plan and send the powers to other realities. 2. Have John take Jonah's place as the pupil to make the world a little more tolerable until the end. Or 3. Leave everything as is. John doesn't want to force other realities to potentially endure what their reality has, and proposes that they use the moment that the fears detach when Jonah is destroyed to contain them and possibly destroy them. John wants to go with option 2, adding that he could also try to speed up the process and wipe out humanity in this reality. Balsira isn't super for this idea. They don't even know if the powers even originated in this universe. So after some more arguing, they decide to go with the first plan. John and Georgie go out for a smoke before they kick off their plan. This is important. Martin and John talk outside alone, and Martin says he will always stand by John. They return to the tunnels to discuss their plan. Georgie and Melanie will blow up the gas main while Balsira distracts the archivists. John and Martin will take on Jonah Magnus while this is happening. Martin will be the one to kill Jonah though, so that John does not become the pupil. Episode 200. The last episode. John enters the Panopticon alone. He commands the Eye to release Jonah and explains that he has decided to starve the entities and cut them off here and now. Jonah, now released from his floating godlike state, bargains with John after he realizes he's serious. John punches Jonah a few times before killing him, taking it out for Tim and Sasha and everyone else who he hurt, and then stabs him and kills him. John is taken as the pupil of the Eye. He dismisses Rosie from her duties, and she thanks him for this. John begins a statement about the fears themselves and where they came from and how they developed. At first, it was only one entity, feeding on the fear of prey. As these beings developed more complex thoughts, the fears developed alongside them, allowing this singular entity to split into more. The end developed next, as humans began to fear death. Next was the dark and what hides in it. As humans developed more, they developed the fear of being unable to trust what they saw, and the fear of terrible knowledge they weren't meant to have, and so the spiral and the eye were born. Trust between family members and friends created the fear of loss, bringing forth the stranger and the lonely. After taming fire, the fear of destruction and the pain that it can bring brought the desolation. The corruption and the buried developed as we did. The vast developed as humans began to realize their own insignificance compared to the universe. Humans learned to plan and scheme, allowing the web to develop, causing more things like war, bringing forth the slaughter. As humans encountered these fears, some began to serve them, revering them like gods. But the connection through these humans, the powers became more proactive and held more power, creating monsters that manifested in our world. The entities began to want to enter this world rather than just watching and feeding. The web, with its plotting and scheming, was given a mind of its own, and quickly realized it could manipulate the eye into an escape. As John prepares his plans to wipe out the powers from existence, Martin enters the room. Martin explains that he knew what John was up to and sent Melanie and Georgie early to blow up the gas main. John is a little smug about this until he realizes he gave Georgie his lighter when they went for a smoke. John, now the pupil of the eye, cannot escape the panopticon, but tells Martin to leave. Martin refuses. John asks Martin to stab him so they can put an end to this. Martin and John share a kiss before Martin does the deed. Then we hear an explosion. A tape recorder clicks on. Balsira, Melanie, and Georgie are sifting through the rubble of the Institute looking for John and Martin. We find out that their bodies still haven't been located, but that fate may be better than anything else. She alludes that something happened to Simon Fairchild. We don't know what, but I can't imagine people aren't super pumped about being tortured by him. The three decide to stop looking, that it's over. They should just accept that they're gone and move on. And so they do. And the series ends. So we don't know what happened to John and Martin at the end of the series. The couple may have died, but their bodies can't be found, so there's no exact concrete answer. I have my own theories, but honestly, I would love to hear what you think happened in the comments. Melanie lived, Georgie lived, Balsira lived. Daisy was killed by Balsira. Jonah/Elias was killed by John. Annabelle Kane's unknown, possibly alive. Mikhail Saleza was killed by Annabelle. Helen was smited by John after lying about being scared. Not Sasha was smited. Peter Lucas died at the end of last season. Jude Perry was smited. Jared Hopworth was smited. Callum Brody lived, and thank God, because I'm so happy they didn't kill a literal child. Simon Fairchild escaped being smited, but probably didn't live after the change back. Julia was killed by Daisy, Trevor was killed by Balsira, Bregan was smited by John to put him out of his misery, and Oliver Banks got to live. So like I said, I know a lot of people don't super love season 5 or how different it is from the other 4 seasons, but I hope my recap and brief explanation of things can help you at least appreciate it a little bit more. I really like season 5, and I feel like it allows more of a deeper understanding of the versatility of the fears. I mean, just look at the ant episode. It explores 2 sides of the corruption and how the same situation affected these people differently. I love what Johnny Sims did with the series and how he ended it. I think the conclusion leaves you with a lot to think about and allows you to think up your own ending on what happened to John and Martin. With the Magnus Protocol now out, I have my theories, but I'll talk about those some other times. So that's my recap of season 5. I also have a full series review and philosophical discussion that I am gonna link right here, if you want to watch that. I hope you enjoyed my recap of the seasons. I have all of the other 4 seasons recapped too, so you can check that out if you want. I want to make more Magnus Archives content, so let me know in the comments what topics you would like to see me cover. I know I'd personally love to talk about the spiral in the end, as those are my favorite fears, but I'd love to hear what you guys want to hear too. Also going to be doing recaps on the Magnus Protocol as it comes out, so look out for those. I think I'm going to do that though once the first season is over. Just so we have all the facts and information. So thank you for sticking with me throughout this whole video. I have a feeling this one is going to be a bit longer, judging by how long this script is and how long my raw footage is. But we'll see after I edit it, I guess. I hope you have a good day, week, month, life. I love you if no one has told you today, and I'm proud of you. Oh, I had coke, not the drug. My dog's walking down the stairs. I wrote Martinini. Oh, I misspelled Martin's name as Martini in my script. That's really funny. That's my cat's name. No. Due to the lack of eye contact with the eye. That's funny. Eye contact with the eye. I didn't mean to say that. So thank you for sticking me. Bye.